All right, well, good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started this morning with our Sunday school hour, and we are in Joshua, and you'll have to forgive me, even though this book is the one that I'm named after this guy. I've told you before that I just finished teaching a class for Chafer Seminary, and we were just going over this, so I may not remember exactly where we were. So if it sounds familiar, that's because I backed up a little too far, but it won't hurt us. I think that we talked about Rahab, right? We talked about the nature of Rahab and everybody's pearl clutching over whether it was okay for Rahab to lie to the Canaanites, right? And you all know that I have a fairly simple opinion about that, and that it was definitely okay, and that I would do far worse, potentially, in order to accomplish the same goal. And Rahab is, in fact, honored for what she does here. So we're not going to argue with the Bible over whether what Rahab did was righteous or not, right? Yes? She was justified in the sight of men. She was declared to be righteous. James says that, in fact. And once you understand the book of James properly, you can understand exactly what he's referring to as righteous, rewarded behavior on her part. And so they leave, right? And she lies more than once. They're not here. They went down this road, and then she misdirects them and sends the spies up into the hill country to hide for a few days. So the spies come back, and they relate to Joshua as faithful spies. These guys are shaking in their boots. This is going to be no problem. We got it at the end of chapter 2. So here's where I'm not sure. Did we go into Israel crossing the Jordan? Chapter 3? No, we did not. Okay. It is a little bit of a blur because I'm telling you, I taught the book of Joshua in probably 2.5 hours, and then I went into Judges and taught that again. So it kind of gives me pause. All right, so here we are. And you'll remember that Joshua, his name, this is actually the name Jesus in Hebrew, right? This is that Yahweh saves. And he is delivering the land for the people and delivering the people from the inhabitants of the land. That is actually what he is proceeding to do. You remember that he is specifically gifted with a portion of Moses' powers and gifts, right? Yahweh said to Moses and gave him some control, some delegated sovereignty over how much of his authority he granted. You can go back and read that if you'd like, because you all have a concordance now, right? You do, you just don't know it. It's on your phone. You can go and look up Joshua, the references to Joshua in the story of Deuteronomy, and find the part where Moses lays his hands on him, gives him some of his authority and some of his power. And we have that, right? You have the posthumous declaration that Moses is the servant of Yahweh. We have the same at the end of Joshua, that it's always posthumous in this case, always after they have passed physically, that he is a servant of Yahweh, and he is finishing this portion of the responsibilities that Moses had, because Moses disqualified himself from the blessing and the honor of doing it. So that's where we're at. He's going in, making these final preparations before taking the land in faith. Everywhere he sets the sole of his foot will be his, just as it was commanded to Moses. That parallel is consistent all the way through the book. But here, they have received the report, chapter 2. Let's just read some verses here. Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and he and all the sons of Israel set out from Shittim and came to the Jordan, and they lodged there before they crossed. And at the end of 3 days, the officers went through the midst of the camp, and they commanded the people, saying, "When you see the ark of the covenant of Yahweh your God with the Levitical priests carrying it, then you shall set out from your place and go after it. However, there shall be between you and it a distance of about 2,000 cubits by measure." Anybody better at the maths than I am? How does that work out? At an 18-inch cubit, which is what we statutorily say it is, we're not sure, at 2,000 cubits. Anybody? You'll all have your phones out. Somebody get a calculator out. I'm not going to do it. How much is 2,000 cubits? No, I don't want Ryrie, I want math. No, Ryrie probably did math. Okay, what does he say?
3,000 feet.
3,000 feet. 2/3 of a mile? right? That's the amount of space. 5,280 feet is still a mile in the woke math culture, right? Okay, so 2/3 of a mile, more or less. I doubt they had a measuring tape out, but this is 2,000 cubits. Stand back, do not come near it, that you may know the way by which you shall go, for you have not passed this way before. In other words, he doesn't want them following them like they're looking at a blade of grass. He wants to see the big picture, wants them to still see the lay of the land, wants them to still see what they're possessing. You haven't gone this way ever. It's been centuries since your ancestors were here. So you need to know that. But you shouldn't get too close, right? You probably have driven behind one of the many gravel trucks or asphalt trucks driving up and down I-10, and all of them say, stay back 200 feet. That's lawyer ease. So we're not going to pay for your windshield. They're not going to pay for your windshield no matter how far back you stand, actually. Even if you are 200 feet, and even if you have video of a rock flying out of their untarped load, they're not going to pay for your windshield. That's what it means, right? 2,000 cubits is the safe distance, right, to stand back. Remember that this was how the Levites were supposed to camp when they encamped. They were supposed to be the buffer zone around the tribes. We looked at that picture. I don't have it at hand. But that was so that nobody would accidentally violate the space and approach in an unholy, uninstructed manner. Same thing was supposed to happen as they were entering the land. The entire time, they were supposed to keep the presence of Yahweh among them consecrated, even while they were moving, even while he was blessing their progress. So, then Joshua said to the people, verse 5, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow Yahweh will do wonders among you. Joshua spoke to the priests, saying, take up the ark of the covenant and cross over ahead of the people. So they took up the ark of the covenant and went ahead of the people. Then Yahweh said to Joshua, I pointed out to my seminary students that there is a point at which this stops in Judges. Up through about probably a third of the way through the book of Judges, Yahweh is still communicating at times directly with the nation and even directly with the leaders of the people as a conversationally like this. Yahweh says to Joshua, that's his personal name, having a personal conversation. And he says to Joshua, this day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel. In other words, it is a process. Glorification and exaltation, at least in some context, is a process and requires faithfulness. He says, I will do this, I'm beginning to do it in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. The exact same way. You shall, moreover, command the priests who are carrying the ark of the covenant, saying, when you come to the edge of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan. Then Joshua said to the sons of Israel, come and hear the words of Yahweh your God. Joshua said, by this you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will assuredly dispossess from before you the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Hivite, the Perizzite, the Girgashite, the Amorite, and the Jebusite. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is crossing over ahead of you into the Jordan. Now then, take from yourselves 12 men from the tribes of Israel, 1 man for each tribe. And it shall come about when the soles of the feet of the priests who carry the ark of Yahweh, the Lord of all the earth, rest in the waters of the Jordan. The waters of the Jordan will be cut off, and the waters which are flowing down from above will stand in one heap. So they get a Moses moment here, right? This was one of the primary validations in the early time of Moses' ministry, that Yahweh was who he said he is, and that Moses had not mistaken his commission, that Yahweh actually was with him, was the parting of the Red Sea that they crossed over on dry land. And Joshua is validated the same way. in this case, crossing over the Jordan on dry land. It is difficult, right? If you're a fan of the Westerns, as I am, particularly, Lonesome Dove. Can I admit that I like Lonesome Dove? Anybody here not seen Lonesome Dove? I know the answer, you bunch of sinners. There's a few of you. You don't raise your hand. I know it's Isabel, one of them. I know it's one of them. But that's okay. We're going to remediate that at some point. But you remember one of the very first episodes of what is a mini-series of it, right? They cross a river. The river crossings were treacherous, and they had tons of them. And one of the young men who had recently immigrated from Ireland dies because they kick up some snakes. And he's bitten by I don't know how many, and they go drag him out. And that's sad, right? Life is tough. That is one of the lessons you learn from Lonesome Dove, that life is tough and it's not necessary, and overcoming all of its difficulties does not necessarily result in success. It's actually quite a sad story. But the cook leaves at that point. He's like, I'm not crossing one more single river after watching that. That particular scene has echoes all the way through many, many, many Westerns as they come. The difficulties of crossing the rivers, that's not even the last one in that show. And so it is a proof of something, right? If God can make smooth the crossing of a river the size of the Jordan, then you need to take that seriously. God is with you if you can just walk across la-di-da like you're walking down a sidewalk across this mighty river. So it is proof. And Joshua says this is what you're going to experience. And this is going to be proof that God is going to dispossess these nations from before you. The 7 nations, right? And it's important to remember that there were 7 specifically that were under the extermination mandate. So this is his promise. So when the people set out from their tents to cross the Jordan, with the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant before the people, and when those who carried the Ark came into the Jordan, the feet of the priests carrying the Ark were dipped in the edge of the water. For the Jordan overflows all of its banks and all the days of harvest, meaning it was raging right now, flood stage. And the waters which were flowing down from above stood and rose up in one heap a great distance away at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan, and those which were flowing down toward the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, were completely cut off. So the people crossed opposite Jericho. In other words, it was actually somewhat more miraculous than the Red Sea. A long way off, the nations and the cities that were along the Jordan could see that the water had stopped cold. It was done at a great distance away. They had much broader path to go through the Jordan than they had to go through the Red Sea. Of course, there was no one chasing them this time. Going across the Red Sea, the water needed to be close enough to execute Pharaoh's armies. As they were passing. So there's probably a pragmatic reason for that. But the witness is such that those who are already trembling are going to tremble more because a river in flood stage just doesn't stop normally. And the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel crossed on dry ground until all the nation had finished crossing the Jordan. Any observations on chapter 3? Anything you want to add or note or invalidate one of my observations? There you go. Sarah wants to invalidate one of my observations. I'm just kidding, Sarah. I always get somebody with that one. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, how long do you think it took to cross?
Don't know. A lot of people. 600,000 warriors extrapolates to a lot of people, a lot of equipment. Just the tribes carrying, just the Levitical clans carrying the tabernacle would take a long time, I think, with their ox carts and all of that. But hours and hours and hours minimum. Yeah. long time. So again, the sign is pretty substantial. If the God of Israel can stop the river in flood stage a great distance away for all that time, it's a very substantial witness. So, chapter 4, when all the nation had finished crossing the Jordan, Yahweh spoke to Joshua, saying, "Take for yourselves 12 men from the people, one man from each tribe, and command them, saying, Take up for yourselves 12 stones from here out of the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet are standing firm, and carry them over with you and lay them down in the lodging place where you will lodge tonight." So Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the sons of Israel, one man from each tribe. Joshua said to them, "Cross again to the ark of Yahweh your God into the middle of the Jordan, and each of you take up a stone on his shoulder according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Israel. And let this be a sign among you, so that when your children ask later, saying, 'What do these stones mean to you?' then you shall say to them, 'Because the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of Yahweh. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall become a memorial to the sons of Israel forever.'" I don't know how rocky the place you grew up was. I grew up outside the hill country and in the hill country a little bit, and there are rocks everywhere. If you want to, Thaddeus has been digging a trench in our backyard to run electrical wire back to the garage. He has dug about 100 feet of trench. How many hours did that take you, Tato?
130 and about
12 hours. Now, where I grew up, that just simply wouldn't happen. He's just using a little trenching shovel and a little grubbing hoe. That would be one sheet of limestone going down 12 feet where we grew up, Priscilla and I. You use what's called a rock saw, and you break the rock saw sometimes. You always find in a trench it breaks off the teeth. It's terrible to try to dig anything. But also in that area is a major, the region is known worldwide for flash flooding, and so you have all these dry creek beds, and you have all these stony bottomed rivers, and you can tell the difference. The rocks that have been in the middle of the river, in the middle of the creek, look radically different. In fact, I think we ship them up to El Paso for our decorative rock displays like we have here at the church that Bill Holmes always gets mad at all the little kids for messing with, you know. Has he done that? He probably came out and yelled at his own grandson for moving rocks back in the day. Those rocks I don't think come from El Paso because the bottom of the Rio here is mud. You got to ship those from someplace like the hill country where you get nice, smooth, pretty round rocks, right? So they're getting big ones of those. And you could tell the difference, right? You would, for forever, as long as those pillars were set up, you knew where they came from. No one would ever know, and they would ask, how in the world did they get those out of the River Jordan? Because it's not like the rivers we have here, right? The Rio Grande, right? The Rio Bravo, they call it on the other side. When it's at its most bravo these days, it's about 2 feet deep where I live. That's not the Jordan, right? It's not an easy task any other way. They came out of the middle of the river. So it would be a memorial to the sons of Israel forever. It would be a unique monument, not just a pile of rocks, right? You know that there were the pyramids that we know about, speaking of man-made piles of rocks, that's the pinnacle of the pyramid culture, the pyramid tradition. We've discovered now that it took them a long time to figure out how to build a pyramid. And it took them a long time to figure out how to build a pyramid that stood the test of time. And so now they go out and find what they think are just hills in the ancient Near East and find out that they're man-made. They were pyramids at one time, and they have degraded like improperly prepared adobe structures. Seen an adobe structure getting rotted because nobody fixed the roof and it just turned back into mud. Happened to the early pyramids. That wouldn't happen to this stone pillar. It wouldn't be forgotten. be a memorial. Anyway, an important marker for them, because God did not leave them without testimony in their immediate vicinity. Physical, actual testimony, not the words of their elders only, but with monuments to future generations. So they did that. The sons of Israel did as Joshua commanded, took out 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, just as Yahweh spoke to Joshua. According to the number of the tribes of sons of Israel, they carried them over to the lodging place and put them down there. Then Joshua set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan at the place where the feet of the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant were standing, and they are there to this day. For the priests who carried the ark were standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything was completed that Yahweh had commanded Joshua to speak to the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua, and the people hurried and crossed. I think we can give them a little bit of leeway there, right? They're standing in the middle of a flood stage river and they hurry. Some people I've heard try to say that they weren't really all that, they didn't really believe God because they were hurrying. Yeah, they did. They were standing in the middle of a flood stage, River Jordan. And all that was standing between them visibly was a bunch of priests holding a box with cherubim on top. Now, you want to science that, you're going to have a hard time. So hurrying is okay, right? They weren't standing there. You know, we have a water contractor right across, renting our lot right here. And one of the things that you can see right against the fence is a massive, big bilge pump, essentially, on a trailer. They didn't have a massive bilge pump pumping water out of the sidewalk in the middle of the Jordan. There was no reasonable observation as to how the water was being held back. So we can let them hurry without criticizing, right? They hurried and crossed, and when all the people had finished crossing, the ark of Yahweh and the priests crossed before the people. The sons of Reuben, sons of Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over in battle array before the sons of Israel, just as Moses had spoken to them. About 40,000 equipped for war crossed for battle before Yahweh to the desert plains of Jericho. Now you remember that the 2.5 tribes had made a bargain with Moses. They said, we have all this livestock and we see all the grass on this east side of the Jordan, and we're asking that this be our property. And Moses gets really angry at them at first because I think he misunderstands what they're trying to do. He said, if you're trying to not help your family members, the other tribes, your cousins, take the land, then God will curse you with the same curses that he's cursing the Canaanites. So, well, we're not saying that. We're going to still go over. We're going to send our warriors across the river still, and we won't stop until the land is taken. But we want to leave our cattle and our kids and our wives over here. Moses found that acceptable. After Yahweh told him that's acceptable, I think he was still mad about it at first. But Yahweh said that's actually a good idea. So we'll do that. So here we have the fulfillment of their promise, 40,000 of them equipped for war. And on that day, Yahweh exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel so that they revered him, just as they had revered Moses all the days of his life. That's an ironic statement, isn't it? 3 days into the wilderness, how did they revere Moses all those days of his life? Anyone? You brought us out here to die. We're going to starve. We're going to die of dehydration. We don't have any good snacks. Yeah. So take it with a grain of salt. What is happening is that they are acknowledging that Joshua is standing in front of the nation in the position that Yahweh put in place for Moses in this context, right? Because they didn't go more than a few days, at most maybe a few weeks, without grumbling and complaining, to the point that Yahweh himself said multiple times, Moses, I'm sick of these people. Let me just destroy them and start over with you. Y'all remember that? But they revered Joshua just as they revered Moses all the days of his life. Now Yahweh said to Joshua, command the priests who carry the ark of the testimony that they come up from the Jordan. So Joshua commanded the priests, saying, come up from the Jordan. See, Scripture is so simple when people are obedient, right? There's no exposition and whatever necessary. Yahweh says to Joshua, do this. He does it. They do it. It's all done. And then there's success that follows that. And it came about when the priests who carried the ark of the covenant of Yahweh had come up from the middle of Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet were lifted up to the dry ground, that the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and went over all its banks as before. Now the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th of the first month and camped at Gilgal on the eastern edge of Jericho. Those 12 stones which they had taken from the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal. And he said to the sons of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in time to come, what are these stones? And you shall inform your children, saying, Israel crossed this Jordan on dry ground. For Yahweh your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed, just as Yahweh your God had done to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed. That all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of Yahweh is mighty, and so that you may fear Yahweh your God forever. An explicit parallel. Two purposes, and they're eternal purposes, actually. There's no qualification that would say otherwise. In other words, it wasn't just for the 7 nations to be shaking in their sandals, because those guys are going to be exterminated. But the sign is forever. The sign is to all the nations, that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of Yahweh is mighty. It was a testimony, right? And in fact, Moses tells us that that was the purpose of the crossing of the Red Sea and the destruction of Pharaoh's army, so that Egypt would know who Yahweh is. Because as terrible as the sign was, they needed to know Yahweh by his personal covenant name, know his plan for Israel, and know how they needed to respond to it, because justification is by how? Always. Anybody? How do you obtain righteous standing before God? How do you get saved? By grace through faith in God's promise at this point, right? Everybody who's ever been made righteous has always been made righteous by grace through faith. And that was made available to the nations of the earth. In fact, that was the point of Israel as the elect nation and people of God, was to provide a testimony to the nations as to who God is and what he requires of man. And so these signs are set up so that the nations know that. And the dual purpose was so that Israel would fear or worship Yahweh forever. Forever. We talked about that in 1 Peter, right? That the fear of Yahweh, that's the way they described their worship. It was their service of worship, to approach with that reverential consideration for what God requires of them. Well, we still have time. We're going to keep going. I'm not going too fast, am I? Are we okay here? All right. This feels like I'm actually on the bicycle instead of the motorcycle here at the moment compared to my Chafer class. But we're okay? All right. Chapter 5. Hold on, guys. All right. Now it came about when all the kings of the Amorites, who were beyond the Jordan to the west, and all the kings of the Canaanites, who were by the sea, heard how Yahweh had dried up the waters of the Jordan before the sons of Israel until they had crossed, that their hearts melted, and there was no spirit in them any longer because of the sons of Israel. It worked. The testimony initially worked. These are the nations that are under the extermination mandate, and their hearts melted, and there was no spirit. They had no empowering force, right? They were basically blobs, is the idea. That's what happens. You know, we have 3 Great Pyrenees. Well, one's a Great Pyrenees cross at home. And my favorite dog, and I do have a favorite dog. I don't have a favorite child, but I have a favorite dog. Can I have that much leeway? Okay, I have a favorite dog. His name is Hondo. And all 3 of them, when I go get the leash or whatever, and I haven't done this in a while, I haven't gone on walks much, but I'll tell them, let's go on a walk. And the 2 female dogs, all right, we love it. We love walks. We're going to go walk. Hondo looks like he wants to do it. You get about a half a block away, and he just lays down. He's done. Now, he's older now, but he's been doing this since he was just barely above a puppy. And he's about 120 pounds, so when he decides to just lie down, that's it. And I'm not talking about he wants to lie down until we go home. He just lies down. So then you got to drag his butt back home. That's not easy, and it makes you look like a terrible person to all the neighbors. So I've decided I just don't really want to take him for a walk. You know, some people do have to make that decision for taking their children to Target or something, right? I'm just not going to take them because they're little heathens. They do the same thing. You got to drag them out by their foot. And that's the idea. There's no spirit motivating. There's no power. There's no strength. There's nothing, no internal or external impetus that can get you moving. That's the idea. So at that time, Yahweh said to Joshua, "Make for yourselves flint knives and circumcise again the sons of Israel the second time." The 613,000 something men, valiant warriors, had not been circumcised all those years. Not surprising when we realize that that particular generation was under their own kind of extermination mandate, right? They were going to wander around in the desert until they dropped dead. But if they are to take the land, the covenanted land, under the name as the covenant people of Israel, it is important that they embrace the sign of the covenant. We know this because Moses was almost stricken dead himself for not circumcising his son, or that the Yahweh opposed him to his face at the doorway of his tent. And it was only his wife that saved his life. It was not her job, but she saved his life by doing something that was not her job. So Joshua made himself flint knives and circumcised the sons of Israel at Gibeath Haaraloth. Now, guys, I'll tell you, there are some things about being a pastor that I don't just love doing. There's some things that are obligations of leadership that I don't just love doing. But after reading a verse like that, I just have to decide that none of it is that bad, right? To oversee 613,000 circumcisions out in the middle of the desert. That was his job, right? I don't think he did them personally, right? But he delegated, he oversaw the process, he was in the lead. This is the reason why Joshua circumcised them. All the people who came out of Egypt who were males, all the men of war died in the wilderness along the way after they came out of Egypt. For all the people who came out were circumcised, but all the people who were born in the wilderness along the way as they came out of Egypt had not been circumcised. Now remember that Moses told them that as he was giving his last messages in the plains of Moab. He says, look, it's not going to be like it is today. Today, we're all doing what is right in our own eyes. It was not a judgment against them like it is in Judges. That's a repeated refrain in Judges, and it's clearly a negative declaration. But Moses is just telling them it's going to be different. You are going to have to follow the law to a T, which is not something they could do wandering around in the desert. They couldn't do it on the plains of Moab. They can't do it today in New York. They can't do it in El Paso. They can't follow the law even though they try, right? Unbelieving Jewish people who do not acknowledge the Messiah have gone kind of nuts trying to redefine what the law requires of them. You can't keep it outside the land. And you can't keep it without a tabernacle. And you can't keep it without a priesthood. And you can't keep it, you can't. So it's a fool's errand. What Moses is saying now, well, Joshua is saying now, Moses told them when you enter the land, it's going to be different. You're going to have to follow the law. Joshua says it's different now. We're going to do this. For the sons of Israel had walked, verse 6, in the wilderness until all the nation, that is, the men of war who came out of Egypt, perished because they did not listen to the voice of Yahweh, to whom Yahweh had sworn that he would not let them see the land which Yahweh had sworn to their fathers to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So their children, whom he raised up in their place, Joshua circumcised, for they were uncircumcised, because they had not circumcised them along the way. How many times you can stick that particular vocabulary word in a couple of verses? Now, when they had finished circumcising all the nation, they remained in their places in the camp until they were healed. Reasonable standard. Then Yahweh said to Joshua, today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. So the name of that place is called Gilgal to this day. While the sons of Israel camped at Gilgal, they observed the Passover on the evening of the 14th day of the month on the desert plains of Jericho. And on the day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened cakes and parched grain. No milk and no honey yet, but they did eat of the land. And the manna ceased on that day, after they had eaten some of the produce of the land, so that the sons of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate some of the yield of the land of Canaan during that year. The promise is beginning to be fulfilled. Now it came about that when Joshua was by Jericho, that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, are you for us or for our adversaries? He said, no. Rather, I indeed come now as captain of the host of Yahweh. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and bowed down and said to him, what has my Lord to say to his servant? And the captain of Yahweh's host said to Joshua, remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. Now, I'm of the opinion, and I'm not the only one, that this is what we call a Christophany, a pre-incarnate appearing of God the Son. Theologically, we know this. The Bible tells us that no one has seen God the Father at any time. That's part of 1 John. And so then I am left with another member of the Godhead, the Trinity, a person of the Godhead, who does appear. I believe that it is God the Son who is walking in the garden with Adam and Eve. He is the God who can be seen, the person of the Trinity who can be seen and who can be observed. The reason that I say that is, right, he's called an angel, a man, but an angel of the Lord. And he accepts worship. Now, that's not normal for a captain of the Lord's host. That would be akin to the sin that Lucifer committed, right? That Lucifer thought to himself that he could be above Yahweh, his creator, and sought to be worshiped as him. And what was the response? He was cast down and out of his place, and has been at the heels of the seed of the woman since Genesis 3. No being in the Lord's service, in Yahweh's service, certainly no angelic being, ever accepts worship. Ever. Ever. Whenever a member of humanity makes the mistake of falling down at the feet of an angel, he is immediately corrected. And yet this person is not removed from his post as captain of the Lord's hosts. He is still qualified, and he accepts worship. So I'm left with only one option, that he is a person of the Godhead, God the Son. And the words are exactly the same as when Moses stood before the bush that was burning but not consumed, right? What we call the burning bush. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. There it is explicit that he is standing in God's presence. And so it is the same here, I think. I might be wrong, but if I thought I was wrong, I wouldn't have voiced the opinion. So, if you think I'm wrong, go ahead and bring me some Bible verses. We'll do it, but I think I'm right. We got about 3 minutes, so that's enough time to hear some hearty accusations of heresy, if you've been storing those up. Some disagreements, some observations. Do we have any? Because I don't really want to get into the conquest of Jericho. I am equipped. I brought my trumpet even, my shofar. My sons are hoping that I don't get the opportunity to use it. It used to be their alarm clock. I keep it in the office now. Anybody? Okay. Well, we'll stop there because I think we already went beyond what I said I was going to do, and we can do Jericho next time. All right. Father, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for your word. We thank you that you use men like Joshua, who spent a substantial portion of his life serving others in a ministry, uplifting, upholding, supporting Moses' ministry, and that you blessed him with exaltation as the leader of this generation, and that even distasteful leadership responsibilities he engaged in willingly, knowing that it was to bring glory to you among the peoples of the earth. And Father, we thank you for his faithfulness and for the example that he sets forth. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.